The ballroom falls silent as Michael Jordan removes his microphone, his hands steady but his eyes aflame with an emotion none have seen from him before. The aging legend stands, straightens his custom suit jacket, and walks off the stage without another word. 62 years of life etched into his face, yet the pride that carried him to 6 championships remains undiminished. Behind him, the young reporter who asked the question looks confused, unaware of the wound she's just reopened. A name unspoken for 30 years has just shattered the carefully constructed piece of the most competitive athlete who ever lived. What happens when the greatest of all time is forced to face the one failure he can never erase? What did Michael Jordan do all those years ago that makes him unable to even speak a former teammate's name? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Chicago, always his city, welcomed Michael Jordan home as it had countless times before. Snow fell in lazy flakes outside the glass walls of the Langham Hotel's Grand Ballroom, where staff made final preparations for the press conference. Jordan Enterprises was launching its most ambitious venture yet, a nationwide youth basketball academy program designed to discover and develop talent in underserved communities. At 62, Michael Jordan had built a business empire that rivaled his athletic achievements, but this project felt different, more personal. Michael stood at the window of his penthouse suite, watching the Chicago skyline he knew so intimately. The years had been kind to him physically. His frame was still powerful, though his hairline had receded further, and lines of experience mapped his face. He adjusted his titanium cufflinks, a gift from his daughter Rachel on his 60th birthday. They were engraved with 23, always his number, now his legacy. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, not turning from the view. David Monroe entered, tablet in hand. At 58, David had served as Jordan's PR manager and confidant for over 20 years. His salt-and-pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses gave him the appearance of an academic rather than the media bulldog he truly was. "They're almost ready downstairs," David said. "The usual outlets, plus some digital media this time. Diverse group, just as you wanted." Michael nodded, still looking out at the city. "Any landmines I should know about?" It was their ritual before any public appearance. Identify potential problem areas, prepare responses. David had gotten him. Through difficult questions about gambling allegations, his father's murder, even the controversy surrounding his Hall of Fame speech, they had a system, and it worked. Nothing major. They'll ask about the Academy's selection process, funding models, maybe some questions about whether this competes with the NBA's own youth initiatives. Standard stuff. Michael finally turned, his eyes meeting David's. "Who's moderating?" "James." "Hollis, he's solid, respectful of boundaries. Been covering basketball since your second three-peat." Jordan nodded his approval. Hollis was a known quantity. There was comfort in that. "There is one new face," David added, his tone causing Michael to raise an eyebrow. "Young reporter, Sophia Chen. First major assignment for The Athletic. She's been doing some deep research pieces on NBA history, the evolution of the game. Very thorough work." "Too thorough?" Michael asked, reading between the lines of David's careful phrasing. "Just be aware. She seems to take pride in asking unexpected questions, going places others don't." Michael's mouth tightened slightly, then relaxed into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good. Keep them honest. Make sure nobody's asleep in there." He checked his reflection once more in the mirror. The charcoal Tom Ford suit fit impeccably, as all his clothes did. Image had always mattered to Michael Jordan, on and off the court. Control had always mattered more. "Let's do this," he said, straightening his shoulders. Downstairs, the ballroom buzzed with anticipation. 70 journalists, photographers, and camera operators arranged themselves around a small stage set with 4 chairs and microphones. Banners bearing the new Jordan Youth Academy logo, a silhouette of a young player rising toward a hoop, reminiscent of the iconic Jumpman but with its own identity, hung on either side of the stage. In the front row, Sophia Chen reviewed her notes one final time. At 33, she was younger than most in the room, but her rise through sports journalism had been meteoric. She'd developed a reputation for meticulous research and fearlessness in questioning sports figures others, treated with kid gloves, today represented her biggest opportunity yet. Beside her, veteran Chicago Tribune reporter Marcus Thompson leaned over. "First, Jordan Presser?" Sophia nodded. "Is it that obvious?" Marcus chuckled. "You've got that look, part excitement, part terror." "I've interviewed all-stars before." "Sure, but MJ's different," Marcus said, lowering his voice. "Just remember, there are places even the most hard-hitting journalists don't go with him. Unwritten rules." Sophia's eyebrow raised slightly. "Like what?" Before Marcus could answer, the side door opened. The room shifted instantly as James Hollis entered, followed by Laura Washington from the Jordan Academy executive team, and then Michael Jordan himself. Despite his years, Jordan still commanded the room effortlessly. He moved with the fluid grace that had made him poetry on the basketball court, his smile measured but genuine as he took his seat center stage. The camera shutters clicked frantically. "Good afternoon, everyone," Hollis began. "Thank you for joining us for this special announcement. Today, Michael Jordan and Jordan Enterprises are officially launching the Jordan Youth Academy Initiative, a nationwide program designed to identify and nurture basketball talent in communities that have traditionally lacked access to elite training facilities and coaching." The press conference proceeded smoothly. Jordan spoke about his vision for the academy, how it would differ from existing programs by focusing not just on athletic development, but educational support and mentorship. He detailed plans for the first 10 locations, predominantly in urban centers with high rates of poverty and limited recreational resources. "Basketball saved me," Jordan said, his deep voice carrying authority. "Gave me purpose, direction. But I had coaches who believed in me, facilities to practice in. Too many kids today don't have that foundation. This academy isn't about finding the next Michael Jordan. It's about giving young people the tools to succeed, whether that's in basketball or life." The questions from journalists were largely predictable. How would participants be selected? What metrics would determine success? Was this a philanthropic venture or a business one? Jordan handled each with the same cool efficiency he'd once shown dissecting defenses. When he didn't have a specific answer, Laura Washington stepped in with details. The chemistry between them was evident. They'd clearly spent months refining this presentation. Halfway through the allotted time, Hollis pointed to Sophia Chen. "Michael, Sophia Chen from The Athletic." Jordan nodded politely, his expression neutral, as he took in the young reporter. "Mr. Jordan, thank you for taking my question," Sophia began, her voice steady despite the flutter in her stomach. "You've spoken about mentorship being a crucial component of the academy model. Looking back at your own career, you've mentioned Coach Dean Smith, your father, and teammates like Scottie Pippen as key mentors. But I'm curious about the flip side. Were there instances where you feel you failed as a mentor to younger players? During your time with the Bulls or Wizards?" A slight tension appeared around Jordan's eyes, almost imperceptible to those who didn't know him well. David Monroe, standing at the back of the room, straightened. "Interesting question," Jordan replied, after a moment. "I've never claimed to be a perfect mentor. My leadership style wasn't for everyone. I demanded excellence, pushed people hard, sometimes too hard, but that's how championships are won." He paused, then continued with a practiced smile. "Would I do some things differently now? Sure. Age gives you perspective. That's precisely why the academy will have diverse coaching styles. Not everyone responds to the same approach." It was a skillful deflection, and Hollis began to call on another journalist, but Sophia wasn't finished. "If I may follow up," she interjected politely but firmly. I was specifically wondering about Marcus Winters. The name fell into the room like a stone into still water. Jordan's body became perfectly still, only his eyes moving as they locked onto Sophia's face with an intensity that made several nearby journalists shift uncomfortably in their seats. David Monroe took a half-step forward from his position at the back wall. On stage, Laura Washington glanced sideways at Jordan, confusion evident in her expression. Winters' career ended after your confrontation in the Bulls' locker room in '93, Sophia continued, either oblivious to or undeterred by the sudden change in atmosphere. Given the Academy's focus on mental health support for young athletes, I wondered if that experience informed your thinking. For 5 long seconds, Jordan said nothing. The ballroom was completely silent. Then he reached up with deliberate movements, removed his microphone, and placed it on the table in front of him. He stood, buttoned his suit jacket, and walked off the stage without a word. The room erupted in murmurs as journalists turned to each other in confusion. James Hollis, visibly flustered, leaned into his microphone. That will conclude today's press conference. Ms. Washington will take a few more questions about the Academy's operational details. But no one was interested in operational details anymore. All eyes followed Jordan as he exited through the side door, then swiveled to Sophia Chen, who sat perfectly still, her face a mask of professional composure despite the bombshell she'd just detonated. Outside in the hallway, David Monroe caught up to Jordan, who was striding toward the private elevator. "Michael, wait. We need to get ahead of this." Jordan punched the elevator button, his jaw tight. "Not now, David." "Yes, now. You just walked out of your own press conference. Every outlet in there is already running with it. We need—" I said. "Not now." Jordan's voice cracked like a whip, echoing in the empty hallway. The elevator arrived with a soft chime, and he stepped inside. David held the door open. "At least let me come up with you. We need a strategy." For a moment, Jordan looked as though he might refuse, but then he gave a curt nod. The doors closed, leaving them in charged silence as the elevator climbed to the penthouse suite. Once inside the suite, Jordan went straight to the bar and poured himself 2 fingers of scotch. He rarely drank before evening, a discipline ingrained during his playing days, but some rules could be broken. 30 years, he said finally, his back still to David. 30 goddamn years, and it comes back like this. David placed his tablet on the coffee table and sat down. Who leaked it? The Winters story was buried. We made sure of that. Jordan took a sip of his scotch, savoring the burn. Does it matter? It's out now. He turned to face his friend and advisor. Get me everything on this Sophia Chen. Everything. Already on it, David replied, his fingers moving across the tablet. Born in San Francisco, Stanford Journalism School, worked at the San Francisco Chronicle, then The Ringer before The Athletic. Well respected, known for historical deep dives. How did she find out about Winters? Most of the beat reporters from that era are retired or dead. David swiped through more information. I don't know yet, but she's been working on a series about the mental health costs of athletic greatness. Interviewed several former players who struggled post-career. Jordan moved to the window again, looking out at the city now being swallowed by early winter. Darkness. Snow continued to fall, heavier now. Call Rachel, he said suddenly. Tell her dinner's canceled. David looked up in surprise. Your daughter is already in the city. She flew in specifically to celebrate the Academy launch. Just do it. Michael, with all due respect, that's not the right move. Canceling family plans makes this look bigger than it is. We need to project normalcy while we contain this. Jordan didn't respond immediately. His reflection in the window showed a face locked in thought, in memory. Finally, he nodded. Fine. Dinner stands. But I want that reporter gone from any future Academy events. Make it clear to The Athletic that access depends on it. David hesitated. That's likely to backfire. Makes it look like she hit a nerve. Better. To I don't care how it looks, Jordan snapped, then caught himself. He took another sip of scotch. Just handle it, David. That's what I pay you for. David knew better than to push further. In 20 years he'd learned when Jordan was immovable. This was one of those times. I'll take care of it, he said, rising. The car will be ready at 7 for dinner. I suggest you rest until then. After David left, Jordan remained at the window for a long time. Outside, Chicago continued its business, unaware that its most famous son was wrestling with ghosts he'd thought long exorcised. He pulled out his phone and opened a private photo album, pictures he reviewed rarely but could never bring himself to delete. There it was, the 1993 Bulls team photo. His finger hovered over a face in the second row, a young man with bright eyes and an easy smile seated next to Scottie Pippen, Marcus Winters, the rookie who'd challenged him, the talent he'd broken, the name he had not spoken in 30 years. The restaurant was Chicago classic, wood-paneled walls, subdued lighting, and impeccable service. Situated on the top floor of a Michigan Avenue building, it offered spectacular views and, more importantly for Michael Jordan, absolute privacy. The owner had closed the entire establishment for the evening, something he'd done numerous times over the decades when Jordan needed discretion. Rachel Jordan arrived 15 minutes early, another trait she shared with her father besides his eyes. At 34, she'd established herself as a force in her own right, a civil rights attorney whose work focused on criminal justice reform. Where her father had dominated the basketball court, Rachel dominated courtrooms with the same relentless drive. She checked her watch, a vintage Patek Philippe that had belonged to her grandfather, then smiled as the host approached. "Miss Jordan, your father just arrived." "This way, please." Michael waited by the table, still an imposing figure at 62. When he saw Rachel, his face transformed, the lines of stress melting away into genuine warmth. They embraced, and he kissed the top of her head as he had since she was a child. "You look tired," Rachel said as they sat down, her eyes scanning her father's face with the same analytical precision she applied to legal briefs. "Thanks," he replied dryly. "Good to see you too." Rachel smiled. "I'm not the media, Dad. You don't have to pretend with me." A waiter approached with water and wine recommendations. After he left, Rachel leaned forward. "I saw what happened at the press conference." Jordan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "David called you." "No, Twitter called me. You're trending." She pulled out her phone and turned it toward him. "Jordan, walkout, is the #1 topic nationwide." Jordan took a sip of water, his expression revealing nothing. "It'll blow over." "Maybe," Rachel conceded. "But I'm curious. Who's Marcus Winters?" For a moment, Michael looked like he might shut down the conversation entirely. Rachel recognized the look. She called it his championship face, the expression he wore when he refused to be denied. But then something shifted, a subtle softening. Around his eyes. "Someone from a long time ago," he said finally. "Not relevant anymore." Rachel studied her father. "Relevant enough to make you walk out of your own press conference. That's not like you." The waiter returned with bread and took their orders. Filet mignon for Michael, salmon for Rachel. When they were alone again, Michael leaned back in his chair. "The academy launch is what matters," he said. 10 facilities across the country, opportunities for kids who wouldn't get them otherwise. That's the story, not some rookie from 30 years ago. Rachel recognized the deflection tactic. She'd seen her father use it countless times with the press, with business associates, even with family. Direct the conversation toward what you want to discuss, away from uncomfortable truths. "It's a great initiative," she agreed. "But you know what will overshadow it now? The mystery of Marcus Winters. The internet is already digging. Somebody will find something." Jordan's phone buzzed with an incoming text. He glanced at it, his expression darkening momentarily before he silenced the device and placed it face down on the table. "David?" Rachel asked. Michael nodded once. "Nothing that can't wait." "Dad," Rachel said, her voice gentler now. "Whatever happened with this Winters person, maybe it's time to address it. Get ahead of the story." Michael's eyes met his daughter's, and for a brief moment Rachel glimpsed something she rarely saw. There. Uncertainty. "Some stories aren't meant to be told," he said quietly. Their food arrived, providing a welcome interruption. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Rachel spoke again. "Remember what you always told me about facing defenders? Never back down, never show fear?" A ghost of a smile touched Jordan's lips. "Using my own words against me. Your mother's influence." "Maybe," Rachel acknowledged. "But it's good advice, on and off the court." Michael set down his fork, studying his daughter. "This isn't a game, Rachel. Real people get hurt when certain stories come to light. Including you." The question hung between them, unanswered, as Michael's phone lit up again. This time, he checked the message and frowned. "I need to make a call," he said, standing. "Excuse me for a minute." Rachel watched her father walk toward the private balcony, phone all ready. To his ear, even in this moment, his posture remained perfect, shoulders back, head high, the bearing of a man who had spent his life in the spotlight. Outside on the balcony, Michael closed the glass door behind him. The cold air bit through his suit, but he welcomed the clarity it brought. "Talk to me," he said into the phone. David's voice came through clearly despite the wind. "It's spreading fast. ESPN is running with it. So are the major sports sites. They've dug up some basic information on Winters, his draft position, the few games he played, his departure from the team. What about the incident?" "Nothing specific yet. The records were well buried, and most of the witnesses kept quiet at the time. But Sophia Chen published a follow-up piece 30 minutes ago. She has sources, Michael. She knows more than she let on at the press conference." Jordan pinched the bridge of his nose. "What exactly does she know?" "She cites unnamed team sources describing a catastrophic locker room confrontation after a regular season loss to the Knicks. She mentions Winters challenging your leadership publicly, you responding with, the article uses the phrase psychological warfare." "Jesus," Jordan muttered. "There's more," David continued. "She's tracked down Winters." Jordan's hand tightened. "On the phone." "Where?" "Living in Portland, working as a high school counselor and basketball coach. She's requested an interview." "Will he talk to her?" "Unknown." "But Michael—" David hesitated. "There's something else. Tanya Washington gave a statement." The name hit Jordan like a physical blow. Dr. Tanya Washington had been the Bulls' team psychologist during that period, one of the first in the NBA. She'd witnessed everything. "What did she say?" "Just a brief comment. The incident with Marcus. Winters represents a dark moment in Bulls history that has never been properly addressed. The mental health consequences for all involved were significant and lasting." She declined further comment but didn't rule out speaking in more detail later. Jordan leaned against the balcony railing, looking out at the Chicago skyline. The city lights reflected off the falling snow, creating an otherworldly glow. For a moment he allowed himself to remember. The locker room, Winters' defiant stance, words that couldn't be taken back, and the aftermath that had haunted them all. "Michael, are you still there?" Jordan returned to the present. "Find out if Winters will talk to her, and get me Tanya's number. I need to speak with her directly. Is that wise? Any contact from you will just fuel the story. Just do it, David." Jordan ended the call and stood in the cold for another minute, gathering himself before returning to the table. Rachel looked up as he sat down. "Everything okay?" "Fine," he replied automatically, then caught himself. "Actually, no, not fine." Rachel's eyebrows rose slightly at the rare admission. "This story, the Winters thing, it's gaining traction," he continued. David thinks it could overshadow the Academy launch. He's probably right, Rachel said, but that doesn't explain why it bothers you so much. You've weathered controversies before. Michael cut a piece of his steak, considering his words carefully. This is different. It's personal. Because of what you did, or because of what happened to him afterward? Michael looked sharply at his daughter. What do you know about it? Rachel held his gaze. Not much. I've been reading what's available online while you were on the phone. There isn't much. His stats, his draft position, the fact that he left the team suddenly in the middle of the '93 season. No official reason given. Then nothing. Like he disappeared. He didn't disappear, Michael said quietly. He just wasn't Michael Jordan, so nobody cared what happened to him. The bitterness in his voice surprised Rachel. She'd rarely heard her father speak this way about his fame or its consequences. So, what did happen to him? She asked. Michael was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost as if he were talking to himself. He was good. Really good. Quick hands. Great court vision, fearless. Reminded me a little of myself at that age, but with better passing skills. The coaches saw it, too. Started giving him more minutes, talking about how he could be the future of the franchise. And that threatened you? Rachel kept her tone neutral, free of judgment. Michael shook his head. No, I was Michael Jordan. I didn't feel threatened by rookies. He paused. But I did expect respect, deference. Which he didn't show. No, he didn't. Michael took a sip of his water. We lost to the Knicks at home. Ugly game. I wasn't at my best. Patrick had my number that night. In the locker room afterward, Winters said some things. What things? Michael's eyes grew distant. Questioned. My shot selection. Said I was playing for stats, not the team. Called me selfish. Said maybe I wasn't the leader everyone thought I was. Rachel winced. In front of the team? In front of everyone. Team, coaches, some reporters who hadn't left yet. And you responded. It wasn't a question, but Michael answered. Anyway. Yes, I responded. Rachel waited, but her father offered nothing more. The silence stretched between them until she finally broke it. Whatever you said, Dad. It was 30 years ago. People say things in the heat of the moment, especially after losses. Michael's gaze focused on her again, suddenly intense. You don't understand, Rachel. It wasn't what I said in that moment. It was what I did in the weeks that followed. Before Rachel could ask what he meant, the restaurant's manager approached their table, looking apologetic. Mr. Jordan, I'm terribly sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation outside. Michael frowned. What kind of situation? Several reporters have gathered at the entrance. Someone must have tipped them off that you're here. They're asking for comments about today's press conference. Michael's jaw tightened. We'll leave through the kitchen exit. Have the car brought around to the back alley. The manager nodded. Right away, sir. After he left, Rachel reached across the table and took her father's hand. This isn't going away, Dad. Whatever happened with Winters, you need to face it. Michael squeezed her hand gently, then released it. Let's get out of here first. We'll talk more at the hotel. 20 minutes later, they were back in Michael's penthouse suite at the Langham. The snow had intensified, blanketing the city in white. Rachel stood by the windows, watching it fall, while Michael poured himself another scotch. David's on his way up, he said, checking his phone. He's bringing everything we have on the Winters situation. Rachel turned from the window. Will, you tell me the rest of the story before he gets here? Michael took a long sip of his drink. You really want to know about Marcus Winters' life now. What kind of coach he is, what his students say about him, everything. Michael, David cautioned, this isn't just about you and Winters anymore. Chen's article is already connecting this to larger issues. Toxic leadership, mental health stigma, in professional sports, accountability for past actions. If you meet with Winters, whatever happens between you becomes part of that narrative. I'm aware of the risks. Michael replied, his tone making it clear the decision was final. David recognized the futile battle and nodded. "I'll make the arrangements." He gathered his materials and headed for the door, then paused. "What about tomorrow's Academy events? You're scheduled for the ribbon cutting at the Chicago location." Michael hesitated, then looked at Rachel. "Would you stand in for me? You know what this program means, what we're trying to accomplish." Rachel looked surprised but quickly composed herself. "Of course, I'll handle it." After David left, father and daughter sat in companionable silence for several minutes, each lost in thought. Finally, Rachel spoke. "Are you going to reply to his email?" Michael shook his head. "Nothing to say in an email. Either I show up tomorrow or I don't." "And you're going to show up?" "Yes." Rachel studied her father's face, noting the resolve in his expression, the same look he'd worn before championship games. "What are you hoping will happen?" Michael considered the question carefully. "I don't know," he admitted. "Closure, maybe. For him, if not for me." "And if he's angry? If he wants more than just a conversation?" "Then I'll face that, too." Michael reached for his daughter's hand. "Your mother would be proud of you, you know. The way you cut through, all the noise, and get to what matters." Rachel smiled, squeezing his hand. "She'd be proud of you, too, for finally facing this." "Don't be too proud yet," Michael cautioned. "I haven't done anything." "But you will," Rachel said with certainty. "You're Michael Jordan. When it matters, you always come through." The next morning dawned clear and cold in Chicago, the previous night's snow sparkling under bright sunlight. By 6 a.m., Michael was already awake, completing his daily workout routine with the same discipline that had defined his athletic career. As he finished his final set of exercises, his phone rang. David, with the travel details. "The jet is ready at O'Hare, scheduled departure in 90 minutes. We should leave the hotel in 30 minutes to avoid traffic." "We?" Michael questioned. "You didn't think I'd let you do this alone, did you?" David's tone was light, but Michael understood the concern beneath it. "I appreciate that, but I need to do this one-on-one. No entourage, no handlers." A pause on the line. "Michael, I strongly advise against that." "Noted and overruled." Michael's voice softened slightly. "I'll take the commercial flight I booked last night. Already checked in." "You what?" David's shock was evident. "Michael, there are security concerns, press considerations. I'm flying." "Commercial, traveling alone, and meeting Winters by myself." Michael interrupted firmly. "This isn't negotiable, David. I've spent 30 years with layers of protection, people managing every interaction. That ends today, at least for this." After a moment of stunned silence, David sighed. "At least let me arrange private transportation in Portland and secure the meeting location." "Already handled. And before you ask, yes, I remember how to rent a car and use GPS." Despite his concerns, David chuckled. "Fine. Just keep your phone on and call me the second, and I mean the second, the meeting ends." "Will do. And David, handle the press around Rachel today. Make sure they focus on the Academy, not on me or Winters." "Already on it. Good luck, Michael." 3 hours later, Michael Jordan, disguised in a nondescript gray hoodie, baseball cap, and sunglasses, made his way through O'Hare International Airport. The disguise wasn't perfect. A few heads turned and hushed whispers followed him. But most travelers, focused on their own journeys and devices, paid little attention to the tall man in casual clothes. For Michael, there was something strangely liberating about the experience. He'd grown so accustomed to private jets, VIP lounges, and security details that he'd forgotten what it felt like to be just another traveler. On the plane, seated in first class but without the usual buffer of empty seats around him, Michael found himself next to an elderly woman who smiled politely but showed no sign of recognition. As the flight took off, she pulled out knitting needles and colorful yarn. "My granddaughter's expecting," she explained when she caught him watching. "First great-grandchild. Nothing but the handmaid will do." Michael smiled. "Congratulations. Boy or girl?" "Girl. Emily." The woman's eyes crinkled with joy. "Never thought I'd live to see it, but here we are. Life's full of surprises at this age." "At any age," Michael agreed, settling back in his seat. He spent the flight alternating between reviewing the information David had sent about Winter's current life and watching his seatmate's deft fingers create something new from simple strands of yarn. There was something meditative about observing the process, the careful counting of stitches, the occasional undoing and redoing, the pattern slowly emerging. By the time they landed in Portland, the woman had completed several inches of what would eventually become a baby blanket, and Michael had read everything available about Marcus Winter's post-NBA life. The facts were straightforward. After leaving the Bulls, Winters had spent several months in a psychiatric facility, then returned to his hometown of Portland. He'd struggled with depression and alcohol for years before finding stability as a high school guidance counselor and basketball coach. His teams were respected but not dominant, known more for sportsmanship and player development than championships. Former students spoke highly of his mentorship, particularly his ability to recognize and support struggling teens. One detail had particularly caught Michael's attention. Winters ran a summer program for at-risk youth that combined basketball with mental health support, a program not unlike the academy Michael was launching, albeit on a much smaller scale. As the plane taxied to the gate, the woman beside him carefully packed away her knitting. "Visiting family?" she asked. Michael hesitated. "Something like that. An old colleague." She nodded sagely. "Reconnecting is important at our age. Never know how much time is left." The simple wisdom of her words stayed with him as he navigated the airport, picked up his rental car, and drove toward River's Edge Park. Portland welcomed him with gray skies and a light drizzle, weather that matched his mood as he approached, the meeting that had been 30 years in the making. The park was quiet on this weekday afternoon, with only a few hardy joggers braving the damp conditions. Michael parked and checked his watch. 11:45 a.m. He was early, but so apparently was Marcus Winters, who sat alone on a bench overlooking the Willamette River, his posture straight but relaxed. Michael took a moment to study the man from a distance. Winters had aged well, still fit at 60, with closely cropped salt-and-pepper hair and the same upright carriage Michael remembered. He wore a simple weatherproof jacket, jeans, and hiking boots, practical clothes for Portland's climate. Taking a deep breath, Michael exited the car and walked toward the bench. Winters didn't turn, though he must have heard the approaching footsteps. Only when Michael was a few feet away did he speak. "I wasn't sure you'd come." His voice was deeper than Michael remembered, weathered by time and experience, but still holding the same directness that had characterized the rookie who dared challenge him decades ago. "Neither was I," Michael admitted, moving to stand beside the bench. Winters finally turned, looking up at the man who had once been his tormentor. His eyes, the same intense brown Michael remembered, showed neither anger nor fear, just careful assessment. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the empty space beside him. "Unless Michael Jordan's too important to share a bench with a high school counselor." The comment held an edge, but also a hint of wry humor. Michael sat, maintaining a respectful distance. "I got your email," he said unnecessarily. Winters nodded, turning his gaze back to the river. "I figured, given that you're here." An awkward silence settled between them, filled only by the sound of the river and distant traffic. Michael, usually so confident in every interaction, found himself struggling for words. "You're a counselor now," he finally said. "And a coach." "Yes." Winter's reply was curt but not hostile. "Your teams have good reputations, for development, for character." Winters glanced at him. "You've been checking up on me." "Just this morning," Michael admitted. Should have done it years ago. This earned him a raised eyebrow from Winters. Would it have mattered then? The question hung between them, demanding honesty. Michael looked out at the river, gathering his thoughts. "I don't know," he said finally. "Probably not. Back then, I only cared about winning. Everything else was secondary." Winters nodded slowly. "At least you're honest about that." Another silence, less tense than the first. A jogger passed by, earbuds in, oblivious to the historic reconciliation potentially unfolding on the park. "Bench?" "Why now?" Michael asked. "After all these years, why reach out?" Winters shifted slightly, adjusting his position to better face Michael. "That reporter, Chen. She found me. Did her homework, knew things about what happened that I thought no one remembered. She wants to interview me, and you're going to do it. It wasn't a question. I haven't decided yet." Winters studied Michael's face. "Depends partly on what happens here today." Michael nodded, understanding the implicit negotiation. "What do you want from me, Marcus?" The use of his first name seemed to surprise Winters, slightly. "The truth," he said after a moment. "No PR spin, no carefully crafted statement, just the truth between you and me about what happened and why." Michael took a deep breath. "That's fair. Where do you want me to start?" "Why?" The question was simple but loaded with 3 decades of pain. "Was it really just because I called you out after that Knicks game? Or was there more to it?" Michael considered deflecting, minimizing, but the earnestness in Winters' eyes demanded authenticity. "It started with the Knicks game," he acknowledged. "You questioned me publicly, and I couldn't let that stand. But it became more than that." "How?" "So, you were good, Marcus. Really good. The coaches saw it, the teams saw it. You had something special. Not just skill, but fearlessness. You weren't intimidated by anyone, including me." Michael's gaze grew distant, remembering. "And that terrified." "Me?" Winters frowned. "Terrified you? Michael Jordan. Terrified of a rookie?" "Not of your game," Michael clarified. "Of what you represented. Change, the future, a reminder that someday someone would take my place." He shook his head. "I wasn't ready to face that, couldn't even acknowledge it. So instead, I destroyed the messenger." The brutal honesty hung in the air between them. Winters absorbed it silently, his expression unreadable. "Do you know what happened to me after?" he finally asked. Michael nodded slowly. "Some. Hospital, depression. I know you never played professionally again." "That's the outline," Winters agreed. "Here's the rest. 3 months in a psychiatric facility, 2 suicide attempts, years of therapy, a decade of nightmares where the greatest player in basketball history tells me I'm nothing, that I'll never be anything." Each word hit Michael like a physical blow. He'd known his actions had consequences, but hearing them articulated so plainly by the man who'd lived them was devastating. "I didn't know," he said quietly, "about the suicide attempts. I'm sorry, Marcus. Truly sorry." Winters studied him intently, as if searching for insincerity and finding none. "You know what the worst part was? Not the depression, not even losing. Basketball. It was believing you were right, that I really was nothing." Michael flinched visibly. "I was wrong, dead wrong." "Yes, you were," Winters agreed, his tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. "It took me years of therapy to understand that, to realize that the great Michael Jordan, for all his basketball genius, was just a man. A flawed, insecure man who couldn't handle being questioned. In his entire career, through championships and defeats, business successes and failures, no one had ever spoken to Michael Jordan with such unvarnished truth. The instinct to defend himself rose and fell, without finding voice. 'You're right,' he said instead. 'That's exactly who I was. The admission seemed to surprise Winters, who had perhaps expected defensiveness or denial. He looked away, watching a flock of geese land on the river. "I didn't reach out to make you grovel," he said after a moment. "That's not why we're here." "Why are we here then?" Michael asked. Winters turned back to him. "Because that reporter is going to tell this story with or without us, and I needed to see for myself, face to face, if Michael Jordan at 62 is the same man he was at 30. And what's your assessment?" A ghost of a smile touched Winters' lips. "The jury's still out, but you showed up alone. No handlers, no PR team. That counts for something." They sat in silence for a few minutes, both men contemplating the river and the past that flowed between them like the water. Powerful, unstoppable, but perhaps navigable. "Your youth program," Michael said finally. "Tell me about it." If Winters was surprised by the change in subject, he didn't show it. Started 15 years ago. Basketball as therapy, essentially. Kids come to play, stay for the emotional support. We've helped hundreds of teenagers work through anger, depression, family issues. "Sounds like the academy I'm trying to build," Michael observed. "I know, I've read about it." Winters paused. "It's good work, important." "It would be better with your experience," Michael said, the words surprising even himself. "Your perspective." Winters' eyebrows rose. "Are you offering me a job?" "Maybe. Would you consider it?" "Working for Michael Jordan?" Winters shook his head, but there was no anger in his expression. "That would be complicated." "Working with," Michael corrected. "As a consultant and advisor. Help us build the mental health component of the program. On your terms." Winters studied him for a long moment. "Why would you want that?" Michael met his gaze directly. "Because you've been where those kids are, talented but vulnerable, and because you understand something I'm only beginning to learn. Basketball is powerful, but it's not everything." The honesty in the statement seemed to reach Winters. He nodded slowly. "I'll think about it. No promises." "Fair enough." Michael hesitated, then asked, "The reporter, what are you going to tell her?" "The truth," Winters replied without hesitation. "That's non-negotiable." "I wouldn't ask you to lie," Michael assured him. "But maybe we could talk to her together?" The suggestion clearly surprised Winters. "You want to go on record? About all of it?" "Yes." Michael had made the decision in that moment, but it felt right. "No more secrets, no more avoiding your name. It's time I owned what happened." Winters was quiet for a long time, considering. Finally, he pulled out his phone. "I have Chen's number. She's still in Portland. I could call her now." Michael took a deep breath, feeling a weight lifting that he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. "Do it." As Winters made the call, arranging for Sophia Chen to meet them that afternoon, Michael gazed out at the river. For 30 years, he had refused to speak Marcus Winters' name, as if silence could erase the past. Now, in accepting responsibility for that past, he found an unexpected freedom. The greatest competitive edge, he realized, sometimes came not from winning but from acknowledging defeat and learning from it. It was a lesson he wished he'd learned decades earlier. The small conference room at the Portland Marriott had been secured with remarkable efficiency given the short notice. As Michael and Marcus waited for Sophia Chen to arrive, they sat on opposite sides of a polished wooden table, the silence between them no longer hostile but still weighted with history. Michael's phone buzzed for the 5th time in 15 minutes. "David again. Your PR man is persistent," Winters observed. Michael silenced the phone. "He's worried. This isn't exactly following the crisis management playbook. And yet, here you are, off script." "Here we are," Michael agreed, studying the man. Across from him, in the better lighting of the hotel, he could see the fine lines around Winters' eyes, the slight gray at his temples, evidence of a life lived beyond the brief intersection with Michael's own. A knock at the door announced Sophia Chen's arrival. The young reporter entered with a composed demeanor that barely contained her evident surprise at finding both men waiting for her. She wore a professional navy blazer over a simple blouse, her recorder and notebook already in hand. "Mr. Jordan, Mr. Winters," she greeted them, her voice steady despite what must have been shock at the unexpected scenario. "Thank you for agreeing to this interview." "Ms. Chen," Michael acknowledged with a nod. "Please, sit down." She took a seat at the head of the table, creating a triangle with the two former Bulls players. As she arranged her materials, Michael noted her methodical movements, her careful attention to detail. This was not someone who would be easily diverted or managed. "I have to admit," she began, "when Mr. Winters called, I didn't expect to find you here, Mr. Jordan." "That makes two of us," Michael replied with the hint of a smile. 24 hours ago, I wouldn't have predicted this either." Sophia placed her recorder in the center of the table. "Before we begin, I want to be clear about parameters. This is on the record, and I'll be using direct quotes. Is that acceptable to both of you?" Both men nodded. "Good." She pressed record. "For the record, I'm sitting with Michael Jordan and Marcus Winters, former teammates on the Chicago Bulls during the 1992-93 season, meeting together for the first time in 30 years. The date is February 15th, 2025. She turned to Michael first. "Mr. Jordan, yesterday at your press conference announcing the Jordan Youth Academy, you left abruptly when I asked about Mr. Winters. Why are you now willing to discuss this topic?" Michael leaned forward slightly. "Because it's time. For 30 years I've avoided saying Marcus's name, as if that could somehow erase what happened between us. It can't. Some stories need to be told, even when, especially when, they don't reflect well on the storyteller." Sophia made a quick note. "And what exactly is that story, from your perspective?" Michael glanced at Winters, who gave a slight nod, then began to speak. He recounted the Knicks game, the locker room confrontation, and the systematic campaign he had waged against the rookie in the weeks that followed. As the account unfolded, Sophia's pen moved rapidly across her notebook. She asked occasional, clarifying questions but mostly allowed Michael to tell the story at his own pace. When he described his deliberate isolation of Winters from the team, his voice grew quieter but no less clear. "I used my influence to turn everyone against him," Michael admitted. "Coaches, players, even reporters. It wasn't just competition. It was erasure." "And why?" Sophia asked. "What was driving that behavior?" Michael met her gaze directly. "Fear, masked as anger. Marcus represented something I wasn't ready to face. My own athletic mortality. By then, I was known as the greatest player in the game. My identity was completely wrapped up in that. And here was this rookie, this kid, who dared to challenge. Not just my play, but my leadership. So you made an example of him." "Yes," Michael acknowledged. "I did." Sophia turned to Winters. "And from your perspective, Mr. Winters, how did you experience those events?" Winters sat straighter, his hands folded on the table. "At first, I thought it was just typical rookie hazing. Every rookie gets tested, but this was different, systematic, relentless." He paused. "Imagine being in a room where the most important person, the person everyone else orbits around, decides you don't exist. And then, one by one, everyone else follows suit. Did you consider going to the coaches? Management?" Winters gave a short, humorless laugh. "You have to understand what the Bulls organization was then. Michael wasn't just the star player, he was the franchise. No one was going to take the side of an unproven rookie against the meal ticket." "So, what happened?" Sophia prompted. Winters' expression grew more somber. "I broke. There's no other way to put it. Started missing shots I'd always made. Couldn't sleep. Lost confidence. Then came the anxiety attacks, the depression." He paused. One night after a particularly brutal practice where Michael had humiliated me repeatedly, I went home and took a bottle of sleeping pills. The starkness of the statement hung in the air. Michael closed his eyes briefly, the pain evident on his face. Obviously, I survived, Winters continued. My cousin James, he was an equipment manager for the team, got worried when I didn't answer his calls. He found me, got me to the hospital. And after that? Sophia asked gently. I never played for the Bulls again. Spent 3 months in a psychiatric facility. The team released a statement about a knee injury, and everyone moved on. The Bulls went on to win the championship that year. Sophia turned back to Michael. When did you learn about the suicide attempt? I knew he was hospitalized, Michael replied, his voice tight. I was told it was exhaustion, maybe a breakdown. I didn't know about the pills until years later. By then, he trailed off. By then, what? Sophia pressed. By then, it was easier to not think about it at all, Michael admitted. To pretend it never happened. Is that why you've never spoken his name publicly in 30 years? Michael nodded slowly. Partly, and partly because speaking his name would mean acknowledging what I'd done. It was easier to just erase him from my narrative. Sophia made another note, then studied both men. This meeting today, whose idea was it? Mine, Winters said. After you contacted me about the interview, I realized this story would come out one way or another. I wanted to hear from Michael directly, without intermediaries, without PR teams, just man to man. And you agreed to this, Mr. Jordan, knowing it would mean publicly acknowledging behavior that many would consider bullying, perhaps even abusive. Michael met her gaze steadily. Yes. Why? It was a simple question, but Michael took his time answering. Because at 62, I finally learned something I should have known at 30. True greatness isn't measured by championships or statistics. It's measured by how you treat people, especially when you have power over them. He glanced at Winters. I failed that test with Marcus. I can't change that, but I can acknowledge it. Sophia turned to Winters. And you? What do you hope comes from making this story public after all these years? Winters considered the question carefully. Closure, partly, but more importantly, perspective. Professional sports has changed in some ways since the 90s, but the culture of winning at all costs still dominates. Mental health is still stigmatized, especially among men, especially among athletes. If this story helps even one young athlete speak up when they're struggling, or one coach recognize the damage they might be doing, then it's worth telling. For the next hour, Sophia guided them through a detailed discussion of those 6 weeks in 1993 and their aftermath. Michael described how the team environment had enabled his behavior, with coaches and management looking the other way. Winters spoke about his long journey back from depression, his return to basketball as a high school coach, and the mental health program he developed for young athletes. One thing I've been curious about, Sophia said as the interview began, winding down. Mr. Winters, do you blame Michael Jordan for the end of your NBA career? Winters exchanged a look with Michael before answering. For years, I did. It was easier to have a villain in my story. But the truth is more complicated. What Michael did was wrong, unquestionably. It contributed significantly to my breakdown. But I had vulnerabilities that predated my time with the Bulls. Family history of depression, perfectionism, identity completely wrapped up in basketball. Michael was the catalyst, not the cause. And you, Mr. Jordan? Sophia turned to Michael. Now that you've had this conversation, do you feel responsible for what happened to Mr. Winters? Michael didn't hesitate. Yes, not for everything. Marcus is right about the complexity. But for my part, absolutely. I used my power and influence deliberately to isolate and break down another player. There's no excusing that. What about the broader culture of sports? Sophia asked. Many would argue that mental toughness is essential, that the kind of pressure you applied is just part of separating the great from the merely good. That's a dangerous misconception, Michael replied. Mental toughness doesn't come from being torn down. It comes from being challenged appropriately and supported through those challenges. What I did to Marcus wasn't about making him tougher, it was about making him invisible. Winters nodded in agreement. There's a fundamental difference between challenging someone to be their best and undermining their basic sense of self-worth. One builds resilience, the other destroys it. As the interview approached the 2-hour mark, Sophia reviewed her notes. Just one final question for both of you. What happens next? After this story is published, after the world knows about this chapter in both your lives, what changes? Michael looked at Winters. Earlier today, I invited Marcus to consult on the mental health components of the Jordan Youth Academy. That invitation stands, regardless of this interview or its reception. Winters seemed surprised that Michael had mentioned this. I'm still considering that offer, he said carefully, but regardless of my decision, I hope this conversation represents not an ending, but a beginning of more honest discussions about the psychological costs of greatness, about the responsibility that comes with influence and power. And, for you personally, Sophia pressed, between the two of you. The two men considered each other across the table. 3 decades of silence hung between them, not quite erased, but perhaps bridged. I don't know, Winters admitted. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip, it's a process. But sitting here today, talking openly, that's part of the process. For me, Michael added, it's about accountability. For 30 years, I've built a legacy on the court and in business. But legacies have gaps, and this was mine. Acknowledging Marcus, acknowledging what happened between us. That's filling in a gap I've left open too long. Sophia nodded, satisfied with their answers. She stopped the recorder. Thank you both for your candor. I'll be writing this up immediately. Is there anything either of you wants to add off the record? Both men shook their heads. Then I should get to work. She gathered her materials and stood. The story will likely run tomorrow morning. I'll send the final version to both your emails before it goes live. After she left, Michael and Marcus remained at the table, the silence between them different now, laden not with tension but with shared vulnerability. She's good, Winters observed. Very, Michael agreed. Thorough, fair. This will be everywhere by tomorrow afternoon. Michael nodded. I know. Winters studied him. Are you ready for that? The questions, the rehashing of old stories, the inevitable. Hot takes about your character? Doesn't matter if I'm ready, Michael replied with a slight shrug. It's the truth, long overdue. Winters stood, extending his hand across the table. 30 years ago, I would have given anything to see the great Michael Jordan humbled. Now, I just see a man dealing with the same thing we all face eventually, reconciling who we were with who we've become. Michael rose and took the offered hand. The handshake was firm, a gesture not of forgiveness granted or received, but of mutual recognition. About the academy offer, Michael said as they released hands. No pressure, but the invitation is genuine. Your experience, both the basketball and the breakdown, would be invaluable. Winters nodded. I'll think about it. Right now, I need to go home and prepare my wife for the media circus that's about to descend on our quiet life. I'm sorry about that part, Michael said sincerely. Don't be. Some stories need telling, remember? Winters moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Michael, this took courage. Real courage, not the kind they talk about in sports cliches. After Winters departed, Michael remained in the conference room alone, his thoughts churning. His phone had been buzzing steadily. For the past hour, David, no doubt frantic about the unauthorized interview. The story would break tomorrow, and with it, a carefully maintained 30-year silence would end. He should have felt anxiety, perhaps even dread. Instead, he experienced a peculiar lightness. For decades, the name Marcus Winters had been a weight he carried, a ghost that haunted the edges of his legacy. Now, finally, he had spoken the name aloud, acknowledged the man behind it, and in doing so, perhaps exorcised the ghost. Michael picked up his phone and dialed. David answered on the first ring, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Michael, where have you been? I've been trying to reach you for hours. The team in Chicago needs direction. The press is speculating wildly, and—" "David," Michael interrupted, calmly. "I just finished an interview with Sophia Chen. Marcus Winters was there, too." The silence on the other end was profound. When David finally spoke, his voice was carefully measured. "Please tell me you're joking." "No joke. It's done. The story runs tomorrow." "What exactly did you say?" "The truth. All of it." Another long silence. "I'm coming to Portland. Stay where you are. Say nothing to anyone else until I get there." "I'm flying back to Chicago tonight," Michael countered. "Meet me there." "Michael, this isn't a debate, David. The interview is done, the story will run, and now we deal with the aftermath. Together, as a team, back in Chicago." After ending the call, Michael stood at the window, looking out at Portland's rainy afternoon. Somewhere out there, Marcus Winters was driving home to his wife, carrying the weight of revelations and memories. Somewhere else, Sophia Chen was carefully crafting the story that would expose one of basketball's long-buried secrets. And here, in this anonymous hotel room, Michael Jordan, six-time champion, cultural icon, billionaire businessman, felt for the first time in decades that he had faced a truth more demanding than any game-winning shot, any business negotiation, any public challenge. He had faced himself, not the myth, not the legend, but the man with all his flaws and failings. And in doing so, he had finally spoken a name he had avoided for 30 years. Marcus Winters. It wasn't redemption, it wasn't even forgiveness, but it was, perhaps, a beginning. The Chicago Evening News played on mute in Michael's penthouse suite as he unpacked his overnight bag. He'd returned on a late flight, exhausted but strangely at peace. Tomorrow, Sophia Chen's article would break, and with it, the carefully maintained silence surrounding Marcus Winters would end. Michael had made his peace with that inevitability. A knock at the door announced David's arrival. When Michael opened it, his PR manager stood there looking uncharacteristically disheveled, his tablet clutched in a white-knuckled grip. "We have a problem," David said without preamble, striding into the room. "A big one." Michael closed the door. "The Chen article? I told you I'm prepared for whatever comes from that." "Not the Chen article," David replied, turning to face him. His expression was grave. "It's Dr. Washington. Tanya Washington." The name brought Michael back to that period in 1993, the team psychologist who had tried to intervene, who had warned him about Winters' deteriorating mental state. She'd left the Bulls organization shortly after Winters' breakdown, her departure as quiet as his had been. What about her? David handed Michael the tablet. On the screen was a video paused on Tanya Washington's face. Older now, her dark hair, streaked with silver, but still recognizable with the same penetrating gaze that had once challenged him across an office desk. "This just posted 20 minutes ago. It's already at 50,000 views and climbing." Michael tapped play, and Dr. Washington's voice filled the room. "For 30 years, I've maintained my professional silence about what I witnessed during my time with the Chicago Bulls. Today, that silence ends. With the recent interest in the Marcus Winters case, I feel compelled to set the record straight, not just about what happened to Marcus, but about the role of the Bulls organization in enabling and then covering up psychological abuse." Michael felt a cold weight settle in his stomach as the video continued. Michael Jordan's treatment of Marcus Winters wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern of behavior that was encouraged and protected by team management. I documented multiple cases of what would now be classified as workplace bullying, targeted harassment, and creation of a hostile environment. When I raised concerns, particularly about Winter's declining mental health, I was told explicitly by team executives to stay in my lane and reminded that championships require sacrifice. Dr. Washington's voice grew more passionate as she continued. What few people know is that after Marcus Winter's hospitalization, I presented my formal concerns to Bull's management in. Yes, not as a lawyer, not as your daughter who wants to protect you, just as someone who wants to understand. Michael sank into one of the plush armchairs, suddenly looking every one of his 62 years. After that locker room confrontation, I made it my mission to break him. Break him how? Every way I could think of. In practice, I'd target him specifically, embarrass him in front of the team, exploit every weakness in his game. I'd call him out in team meetings, undermine his confidence. I froze him out during games, wouldn't pass to him even when he was wide open. Rachel listened without interrupting, her expression carefully neutral. But that wasn't enough, Michael continued, his voice dropping. I started working on the other players, making sure he was isolated. No one sat with him at meals. No one partnered with him in drills. I convinced the coaches he wasn't ready for significant minutes. I even planted stories with friendly reporters questioning his work ethic, his commitment. Why? Rachel asked quietly. Because of one comment after a game? Michael shook his head slowly. Because he was right. That night against the Knicks, I had been playing selfish ball, forcing shots, ignoring open teammates, including him, and he had the audacity to call me on it publicly. So it was about pride. Isn't it always? Michael's laugh held no humor. I couldn't let it stand. The rookie challenging the legend. I had to make an example of him. And it worked, Rachel said, not a question but a statement. Too well. Michael stared into his glass. About 6 weeks after it started, Winters didn't show up for practice. Phil Jackson sent someone to his apartment to check on him. They found him. Michael paused, swallowing hard. They found him in bad shape. He'd been drinking heavily, wasn't sleeping. There were pills, not enough to be lethal, but enough to indicate he was in a dark place. He was depressed? Yes. Tanya, Dr. Washington, had seen the signs, tried to warn me, but I wouldn't listen. Michael's voice had grown so quiet Rachel had to lean forward to hear him. They got him help, kept it out of the press somehow. He never returned to the team. The official story was a knee injury that didn't heal properly. Rachel moved to sit on the arm of her father's chair, placing a hand on his shoulder. Did you ever speak to him again? Once, I called him in the hospital, told him to get better, that his spot on the team would be waiting. But you didn't apologize. Michael looked up at his daughter, his eyes reflecting decades of regret. No, I didn't apologize. I didn't even acknowledge what I'd done, and he knew it. The last thing he said to me was, "You win, MJ. You always do." Then he hung up. The story hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Rachel was about to speak when a knock at the door announced David's arrival. Michael straightened, his moment of vulnerability passing. That'll be David. Let's see what we're dealing with. David entered, carrying a thick folder and his ever-present tablet. He nodded a greeting to Rachel before spreading materials across the coffee table. It's worse than we thought, he began without preamble. Sophia Chen has been working on this story for months. It's part of a larger series on mental health in professional sports, but the Winters incident is clearly the centerpiece. He handed Michael a printout of Chen's latest article. She's found 3 former Bulls staffers willing to go on record about what happened, and she's scheduled to interview Tanya Washington tomorrow morning. Michael scanned the article, his expression darkening. Who leaked this? Who told her to look into Winters specifically? David hesitated, glancing at Rachel, then back to Michael. "We think it was Thompson. Marcus Thompson from the Tribune." Michael frowned. "Why would he guide her to this story? He's always been fair to me." "Not Marcus," David clarified. "James. James Thompson." Michael stared at David, the name registering slowly. "Winter's cousin? The equipment manager?" David nodded. "He's retired now, but he stayed with the organization until 2015. Apparently, he's been helping Chen navigate the Bulls' archives, pointing her toward people who were there in '93. Michael stood abruptly, pacing to the window and back. "This is personal, then. Revenge, after all these years." "Dad," Rachel interjected gently, "does it matter why the story's coming out? What matters is how you respond to it." "Rachel's right," David agreed. "We need a strategy. The obvious move is to issue a brief statement expressing regret about an unfortunate situation from decades ago, emphasize how perspectives on mental health have evolved, and pivot back to the Academy launch." Michael shook his head. "That won't work. Not with Tanya talking. She knows everything, saw everything. If she gives details—" The three fell silent, each contemplating the implications. Finally, Rachel spoke. "What if you talked to Winters directly?" Both men turned to look at her. "After 30 years?" David asked skeptically. "That could backfire spectacularly. What if he records the call? What if—" "Not a call," Rachel interrupted. "In person. Go to Portland. Talk to him face to face." Michael looked at his daughter as if seeing her in a new light. "That's not what I expected you to suggest. You spent 30 years not saying his name, Dad. Maybe it's time you did. Not for the press, not for damage control. For yourself." David was already shaking his head. "Too risky. We have no idea how he'd receive you, what he might say afterward." "Sometimes the right thing to do is also the riskiest," Rachel countered, then turned to her father. "You always taught me to face my opponents directly. Maybe it's time to take your own advice." Michael looked between his daughter and his advisor, weighing their competing counsel. Then his phone buzzed with an incoming email. He glanced at it, his expression changing from consideration to shock. "What is it?" David asked. Michael held up the phone so they could both see. It was an email from an address he didn't recognize, but the subject line was unmistakable. "Michael, we should talk. Marcus Winters." The silence in the room after Michael held up the phone was tense enough to hum. The name Marcus Winters crackled, like a downed wire between the three of them. Rachel leaned forward first, squinting at the phone. "Is that real?" she asked, almost a whisper. David was already on his own phone, verifying the domain, checking for signs of a spoofed email. "It's not spam," he confirmed after a moment. "Encrypted. That server's real. That's his." Michael didn't. "I speak." He was staring at the subject line as though it might change under pressure. Rachel rose slowly and walked to her father. "You said he'd never reach out." Michael's throat moved in a dry swallow. "He never has. Not in 30 years. The email was short. A few lines. No accusation, no apology. Just, "Michael, we should talk. It's time. You know it is. You owe me that much." Marcus, it wasn't rage-filled. It was quiet. A stillness that held something heavier than fury. And in that stillness, Michael saw the years. The face of the 21-year-old Marcus Winters, cocky, fast-talking, explosive on the court, overlaid with the echo of a broken man walking out of the Bulls facility for the last time. Michael hadn't read past the subject line yet, but he could feel Rachel and David watching him. There was no use pretending anymore. He opened the message fully. "I'm in Chicago for 48 hours. I'm staying at the Milton on Wabash, room 1702. I'm not here to blackmail you. I don't need closure, Mike. I need you to know something. And you need to hear it. This is not about the past. Not really. It's about what's next, and why. That moment, our moment, was never what you thought. Marcus Michael clicked the phone off. They sat in the silence for a moment. Then Rachel stood again and walked toward the tall windows of the apartment. "You have to go," she said without turning around. "I know," Michael said before David could object. "No cameras," David warned. "No handlers, just you. He doesn't want a stage. That scares me." Michael nodded. "I'm not bringing anything but myself." David stood. "Then I'll call Tanya. If anyone can prepare you for what Marcus might say, it's her." Hours later, Northwestern campus. The leaves had begun to turn. Tanya Washington met them under a rustling canopy of golds and rust reds, her scarf flapping in the wind. She looked different than she had in Michael's memory. Older, more grounded, but her eyes still held the sharp softness that had once made rookies trust her with their secrets. "Did you read the email?" she asked without greeting. Michael nodded. "He's here, in the city." "I know," she said, beginning to walk. "He called me 2 days ago, said he'd finally decided to speak to you, said it was time." Michael's jaw tightened. "What does he want?" Tanya glanced sideways at him. "To tell you something he's never told anyone. Something he didn't know how to say until now." They walked past an ivy-covered wall. "He said it's not about the past," Michael offered. Tanya stopped. "Michael, it's always about the past. But what he means is, it's not just guilt anymore. Or blame. It's understanding." Michael didn't respond. His breath came out in foggy bursts in the cool air. Tanya let the silence stretch. "I thought I destroyed him," he said finally. "I didn't mean to, but I did." Tanya looked up at him. "You weren't the only one in that locker room, Michael, and you weren't the only one who hurt him." David paced the ornate lobby as Michael stood in front of the elevator, steel doors reflecting back a man who looked calm on the outside and flayed raw on the inside. Rachel had wanted to come, but Michael had insisted on going alone. She'd only said one thing as he left the apartment. "You're stronger than your myth, Dad. Let the man show up, not the legend." He'd thought about that the entire drive downtown. The elevator dinged open. The hallway was quiet, plush, with sound-absorbing carpet. Michael knocked once and then again. The door opened slowly. Marcus Winters stood there. The years had changed him. He was thinner than Michael remembered, his frame wiry but upright. His once vibrant energy had settled into something leaner, an intensity that no longer needed to announce itself. They stared at each other. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Marcus said. "I wasn't sure either," Michael replied. Marcus stepped back, opening the door wider. "Then let's not waste time pretending." Inside, the room was clean but lived in. A half-finished sandwich sat on the desk, a duffel bag in the corner. No handlers, no press. "I don't have a speech," Marcus said, "and I'm not interested in your apology." Michael stiffened but said nothing. "I want to talk about 1991, Marcus said, "but not just what happened. I want to talk about what it meant, and what I've learned about myself, and about you." Michael sat down across from him. "Go ahead." Marcus nodded. "I used to think that day broke me," Marcus began. "But it didn't. It cracked me open. You just happened to be the one holding the hammer." Michael's brow furrowed. "You challenged me. You said things." "I did," Marcus cut in, "and I meant them. But I was 21. I was scared. You were the king, and I tried to stand tall in front of you. I didn't know that was like walking into a storm and daring it to strike." Michael looked down at his hands. "I went too far." Marcus tilted his head. "You did, but here's the thing. You weren't punishing me. You were punishing the part of yourself that couldn't tolerate doubt. You didn't see me. You saw betrayal." Michael blinked, Marcus leaned forward. I didn't come here to settle a score. I came here to say, I'm okay. I made it. It took years, but I stopped measuring my worth by how you saw me. And when I did, I saw you clearly. Not the Air Jordan, the man. The man who couldn't lose, not even a teammate's faith. Michael's voice was low. You're saying it wasn't about me. No, Marcus said. I'm saying it wasn't just about you. The silence between them stretched, but not with hostility. It was the kind of silence born from two men sitting with the truth for the first time. Michael leaned back in the hotel armchair, exhaling slowly. You know, I used to rehearse what I'd say if I ever saw you again. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Yeah? Yeah. Half the time, I'd defend myself. Say I was trying to make you tougher, get you to survive the league. The other half, I'd just tell you I was scared, that I didn't know how to share that locker room with anyone who didn't worship at the altar. Marcus smiled faintly. And which one is true? Michael stared at the floor, jaw tight. Both. There was a beat of shared acknowledgement. Marcus shifted in his seat, less guarded now. I've heard people say you broke me, Marcus said, but they never understood. Breaking wasn't the end. It was the beginning. I rebuilt myself without you. Michael winced. That wasn't the story I told myself. I thought I'd ended your career. Marcus studied him carefully. You did end my NBA career. Let's not dress that up. You shut every door, slammed every window, but that's not the same as ending. Me. You don't get to claim that. You were part of my destruction, not the author of my extinction. Michael met his eyes. I've carried it like I killed you. Don't, Marcus said. You don't get that power. Not anymore. They sat in silence again. This one felt lighter. Not comfortable exactly, but breathable. After a moment, Michael stood and walked toward the window. The Chicago skyline stretched beyond the glass, half obscured by fog. What do you want, Marcus? He asked finally. Marcus took his time before answering. I want the truth in the air, not in a press release, not through some PR filter. I want kids in your academy to know that greatness without accountability is poison. Michael nodded slowly. I want to speak to them, Marcus said. At your academy. Not as a guest, not as a footnote. As someone who was erased and came back. Michael turned around, brow furrowed. You want to be part of it? Publicly? Marcus smiled. It's your choice, Michael, but it's my condition. You want healing? You want to stop being haunted? Bring me in. Let them see us together. Not as a redemption story, but as proof that failure, yours or mine, doesn't have to be final. Michael didn't speak at first, then, you'd do that? I already have kids I mentor, Marcus said. But this, your academy, it's a symbol. And symbols matter, especially when they tell the whole story. Michael walked back to his chair, sat heavily. You realize what the media will do. Let them, Marcus said. Let them talk. Let them write. You've always worried about the myth. I'm offering you the truth instead. Rachel listened quietly as Michael recounted the entire meeting. David sat on the far end of the couch, unusually silent. He wants to speak at the academy? Rachel asked, her voice measured. Michael nodded. Not as a guest star. As a partner. David finally spoke. That's a nuclear option. No, Rachel said firmly. That's transformation. David looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Do you realize what it means to put him on a stage next to Michael? He's the guy who almost killed himself after what MJ did. That's not a panel discussion, that's an earthquake. And maybe that's what we need, Rachel said. Michael rubbed his face. He's not asking for revenge, David. He's offering to build something with me. Something honest, something new. David stood, pacing. The press will eat this alive. Every headline will be about the scandal. Not the academy, not the future, the scandal. They were going to do that anyway, Rachel said. Now, at least we get to frame the story ourselves. Michael turned to the window again. For years he had stood in front of glass like this, at the top of the world, mistaking height for clarity. But this time, he didn't feel taller than anyone. He felt human. I've built empires out of silence, he said. Shut down every story that didn't fit the image. Controlled the narrative. But maybe the kids we're trying to reach need something else. Something real. David stopped pacing. You'd do it, he asked. You'd stand next to him. And say it publicly? Michael turned. I already did. To his face. Now I'll do it to the world. Rachel smiled. Then let's give them something they've never seen before. 2 days later, Chicago Youth Academy. It was cold but sunny. Perfect winter light. The ribbon cutting had been rescheduled for a press conference, the new kind. Cameras were already in place. Reporters packed into the small auditorium. Sophia Chen stood near the back, notebook in hand, watching everything. Her article had gone viral. Tens of millions of views. Her inbox had collapsed under the weight of interview requests, praise, threats. But this was the story she hadn't expected. Michael Jordan stood at the podium in a simple gray sweater and jeans. No branding, no Jumpman logo. Just the man. Thank you for coming, he began. I know there's been a lot said about the past few days, and there will be more. But today, I want to speak directly. Not as a brand, not as a basketball legend, just as a man who got some things wrong, and is trying to get them right. There were murmurs in the crowd. Cameras whirred. I want to introduce someone, he said. Someone I wronged, someone I erased, and someone who's about to help me build something stronger than either of us ever did alone. He stepped aside. Marcus Winters walked to the microphone, and the room fell silent. Winters stood tall. I'm not here for pity, he said, and I'm not here to relive pain. I'm here because the man you know as Michael Jordan invited me, not just to forgive, but to partner, not just to tell my story, but to change what happens next. He looked out at the crowd. Mental health is not weakness. Mistakes are not the end. What you see before you isn't reconciliation. It's responsibility. A beat. Michael and we're building a new program, embedded in the Jordan Youth Academy. Counseling, mentorship, and support for every young athlete who walks through these doors. And I'll be leading it. Gasps, applause, flashbulbs. Michael stepped forward again. If we only teach these kids how to win games, we fail. We have to teach them how to survive pressure, how to recognize pain, how to ask for help, and how to forgive, even themselves. He looked at Marcus. Especially themselves. After the conference, they walked out together. Sophia caught up. Mr. Jordan, she said. He turned. She extended a hand. Thank you for trusting me. Michael smiled. You ask the right question. I just wasn't ready for the answer. That night, Rachel sat with her father on the couch in his penthouse suite. News coverage playing softly on the television. They're calling it the most human thing you've ever done, she said. Michael sipped his scotch. Maybe that's not such a bad headline. Rachel looked at him. You look lighter, he smiled. I am. A pause. You did the thing people think they'll never see from you, Dad. You let go of being the myth. Michael looked out at the skyline, this time not with dominance, but with peace. I think I'm finally ready, he said quietly. Ready for what? Rachel asked. He turned to her. To tell the whole story. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation. The announcement of Marcus Winters joining the Jordan Youth Academy had sent shockwaves through the sports world. Media outlets speculated, fans debated, and former players weighed in. Yet, amidst the cacophony, Michael Jordan remained resolute. Michael stood backstage, adjusting his tie. The weight of the moment pressed upon him, not as a burden, but as a responsibility. He glanced at Marcus, who sat calmly, reviewing his notes. "You ready?" Michael asked. Marcus looked up, a slight smile on his face. "I've been ready for 30 years. They shared a nod, an unspoken acknowledgement of the journey that had brought them here. As they stepped onto the stage, the audience erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, capturing the historic moment. Michael approached the podium first. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "Today isn't just about basketball. It's about growth, understanding, and the power of reconciliation." He paused, scanning. "The crowd, Marcus Winters and I, have a complicated history. But today, we stand united, not just as former teammates, but as advocates for change." He gestured towards Marcus, who approached the podium amidst renewed applause. "Thank you, Michael," Marcus began. "Our story is one of pain, misunderstanding, and, ultimately, healing. We're here to ensure that future generations of athletes have the support and guidance we lacked." The audience listened intently as Marcus detailed the new initiatives at the academy: mental health resources, mentorship programs, and open forums for dialogue. As the event concluded, the two men embraced, symbolizing a new chapter not only for themselves but for the entire sports community. By nightfall, the clip of Marcus and Michael's joint appearance had already gone viral. SportsCenter aired it 3 times an hour. CNN picked it up for its Leaders and Legacy segment. Hashtags like Not Jordan Winters Reunion and Ikaw, the Real 23 were trending worldwide. But upstairs in a quiet suite at the Langham, away from the cameras, the real story was still unfolding. Michael sat across from Marcus and Rachel, legs crossed, a rare expression of satisfaction easing the lines in his face. "We did it," he said. Marcus took a slow sip of his tea. "We did something. Whether it's it remains to be seen." Rachel leaned forward. "You both did more than most people ever get to do. Own a painful truth publicly and use it to help others. That matters." Michael looked at Marcus, the gravity in his eyes returning. "What now?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You tell me. You asked me to walk through this fire with you. I did, but you're the one with the empire. What happens next isn't just about one speech or one story. It's about changing the culture you helped create." Michael nodded slowly. "Then let's tear it down and build something better." A knock came at the door. David stepped inside. "Without waiting. I figured I'd find you both here. Thought you'd want to know." He trailed off, scanning their faces, something unreadable in his expression. Rachel stood. "What is it?" David hesitated, then handed Marcus a phone. "It's Tanya. She said she needs to speak to you directly." Marcus took the phone, confused. "Tanya," he answered, and his face darkened as he listened. Then, without a word, he ended the call. "What's wrong?" Michael asked. Marcus turned to him slowly, something new, sharp, unsettled in his eyes. She said, "Someone leaked." Internal therapy records. From back then. Mine. My private sessions. Michael stood, heart pounding. "What do you mean, leaked?" She got a call from a podcast producer. They quoted her word for word from 1993 transcripts. "Word for word, Michael." Rachel looked from one man to the other. "That's not just unethical. That's criminal." David's mouth tightened. "I'll call legal, right now." "No," Marcus said, holding up a hand. "Let me think." Michael's voice dropped to a gravel whisper. "If someone's doing this to stop us, to shut this down, they're going to wish they hadn't," Marcus said quietly. Hours later, ESPN interview said the studio lights blazed overhead. Across from the anchor desk, Michael Jordan sat in a straight-backed chair, fingers steepled, waiting. Beside him, Marcus Winters. Between them, a table with 2 glasses of water and the invisible weight of history. The anchor, a composed but Visibly excited Linda Rhodes gave the opening spiel. Tonight, we bring you something the sports world never expected. Not a debate, not a confrontation, but a reckoning. With us are two men whose intertwined fates have shaped not only basketball, but the ongoing conversation around mental health, leadership, and the cost of greatness. The camera zoomed in on Michael. He met it without flinching. Mr. Jordan, you've said before that you regret many things, but none more than how things ended with Mr. Winters. Why did you come forward now? Michael's voice was steady. Because the truth always waits. I've spent 30 years running from his name, not because I didn't remember it, but because I couldn't face what it meant. I failed someone I was supposed to lead. Linda turned to Marcus. And you've stayed out of the spotlight for decades. Why step into it now, and with the very man who hurt you? Marcus looked directly into the camera. Because silence is a form of consent, and I won't consent to the next generation of athletes thinking that strength means enduring abuse, or that power goes unchecked. Linda gave a small nod. Some would say this story risks damaging a legacy many hold sacred. What do you say to that, Mr. Jordan? Michael didn't blink. Then it deserves to be damaged. If your legacy can't survive the truth, it's not a legacy. It's propaganda. A hush fell over the studio. Marcus glanced sideways at him, impressed. Linda leaned in. And what about the leaked records? There's talk of legal action. Who stands behind that leak? Marcus shook his head. We don't. No, yet. But I'll say this. Whoever did it wanted to intimidate. Instead, they've galvanized us. This isn't going away. Michael nodded in agreement. We're just getting started. In a dimly lit office across town, a man closed his laptop after watching the interview. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowed. His phone buzzed. Yeah? He answered. They didn't take the bait, came the voice on the line. I can see that. You want me to escalate? He hesitated. No. We watch. Let them think they've won. But keep digging. There's more to that story. I know it. The call ended. The man opened a drawer and stared down at a faded manila envelope labeled Bulls 93. Internal Ops. As the cameras powered down and the stage crew cleared cables, Michael and Marcus stayed seated for a moment longer. You were good, Michael said, finally standing and stretching. So were you, Marcus replied. That line about propaganda? I'm stealing that. Michael chuckled. Be my guest. David entered, holding up his phone. Gentlemen, brace yourselves. That just broke every streaming record ESPN has for a live interview. Rachel's voice came in over speaker from Chicago. The Academy just got 3 new major donor offers, and the Players' Tribune wants an op-ed from both of you. Michael looked at Marcus. You want to co-write something? Marcus smirked. Only if I get final edit. Deal. Tanya watched the replay of the interview from her couch, eyes shining. She picked up her phone and typed a single message to Marcus. You did good, both of you. Then, after a pause, she added, but this next part, it's going to be harder. Get ready. 3 days later, Chicago Youth Academy headquarters. The doors of the new facility hadn't stopped revolving since the press event. The Academy had become a lightning rod for national conversation. Not just about basketball, but about masculinity, mentorship, mental health, and what winning really meant. A group of teenage players stood inside the main hall, looking up at a freshly installed banner. It bore no sponsor's logo, no brand slogan, just 6 words. Toughness includes telling the truth. Marcus stood near them, arms folded. He watched the boys read it. One nodded. Another took a picture on his phone. They weren't quoting Jordan's stats or asking for selfies. They were thinking. That's what mattered. Behind him, Michael approached. Quietly. They reading it? He asked. Marcus nodded. They're reading it. Michael looked at the quote again. Yours, wasn't it? Yours now, Marcus replied. Michael chuckled, low and rueful. Funny how all these years, I thought greatness meant being the last man standing. Marcus didn't look at him. Turns out it means helping the others stand back up. Same. Day. Underground Garage, United Center. Meanwhile, across town, a very different meeting was underway. James Hollis, the veteran sports journalist who'd moderated the now infamous press conference, sat in his parked car staring at a file folder in the passenger seat. It was the same folder seen earlier. Bulls, 93, Internal Ops. A relic he hadn't touched in years. He had been there, at practices, in locker rooms. He'd seen the storm before the silence. He'd never written about it, convinced it wasn't his story to tell. But now the silence had cracked open. He flipped the folder open. Inside were memos, transcripts, and something else. An internal Bulls report from 1993. Confidential. Written by a staff psychologist. It detailed player behavioral evaluations, including a flagged psychological risk rating for Marcus Winters, months before the confrontation. A line had been underlined in red. Winters exhibits symptoms consistent with untreated trauma. Continued. Exposure to high-pressure combative team culture may exacerbate existing instability. Another note. Coach advised. No action taken. James swallowed hard. All these years he'd assumed Michael Jordan had pushed too hard. Now he realized the organization had known, and had allowed it to happen. He picked up his phone. Later that night, Michael's sweet David Monroe paced the floor while Michael stood near the bar, glass of water in hand, watching the city lights. Marcus sat quietly, watching both men. David finally stopped. We've confirmed it. Internal Bulls reports from 93. The team psychologist warned management about Marcus's mental health vulnerabilities before you ever said a word to him. They ignored it. Then you walked into that storm blind. Michael didn't move. They knew, Marcus said softly. And they did nothing. Worse, David added, they used it. That article you found about your shot selection, that didn't leak by accident. We just traced it to a former PR guy under Krause. Michael turned, slow. You're saying I was manipulated? David hesitated. I'm saying you were weaponized. Marcus looked at Michael, eyes steady. You still own what you did, but you didn't create the room you did it in. Michael sat down heavily. All this time, I thought it was just me. My pride, my rage. It was, Marcus agreed, but it was also a system that let it happen. A long silence. Then Michael looked up. I'm not just telling my story anymore. We're telling the whole one. David paled. Michael, if you go after the Bulls, I'm not going after them, he said. I'm telling the truth. We all are. 1 week later, documentary shoot. Begins lights, cameras, truth. The production team from a major streaming platform had flown in to begin filming The Unspoken Name, a documentary project initiated by Jordan Enterprises and Marcus Winters. The opening scene was filmed in the old Bulls locker room. Renovated, yes, but still echoing with ghosts. Michael sat alone at first, in the same spot he had occupied in 1993. His voice was low. You ever bury something so deep you forget it has a shape? He asked the camera. Then, one day it shows up in someone else's eyes, and you see it again. Whole. Real. Later, Marcus entered the shot. No dramatics, just presence. I was angry for years, he said. Then I got tired. Then I got better. Then I got honest. Together, they unpacked the system. How Marcus's mental health red flags were ignored. How Michael's unchecked authority became a tool. How silence was incentivized because silence won championships. The crew filmed them walking through the hallways of the United Center, now filled with banners, but silent about this piece of history. Soon, that would change. Meanwhile, backlash. Begins predictably, the backlash came fast. Old school players called it a soft era. A former teammate released a podcast saying, "This never should have gone public." Columnists questioned whether it was fair to re-examine Jordan's legacy under today's lens. But none of it stopped the momentum. Because something more powerful had emerged, the testimonies of others. Young athletes from college and high school programs began sharing stories. "I was bullied by my coach for a year. I thought it was just me. I saw a teammate try to end his life after a hazing ritual. This story gave me the strength to speak. Reading about Marcus Winters made me finally go to therapy. What Michael and Marcus had started was no longer a reckoning. It was a movement. Chicago, Press Club, public panel, they stood on stage together, not for cameras but for young athletes in the room. Michael told the story again, this time shorter, cleaner. Marcus followed it by speaking directly to a group of high schoolers. "You don't have to be broken to need help," he said. "You just have to be human." One girl in the front row raised her hand. "Mr. Winters, how did you forgive him?" Marcus smiled. "Forgiveness isn't something you give all at once. It's something you offer every day. And some days you fail. But you try again." Michael looked at her. "And sometimes the man you're asking forgiveness from has been waiting 30 years to become someone worth forgiving." The room applauded. Some wept. It was a park bench. River's Edge Park, Portland. The same bench where the confrontation had turned into reconciliation. Now, the final interview. Marcus. "This isn't just my story. It's every athlete who ever felt erased." Michael. "And every champion who thought silence was strength." The director asked one last question. "What would you say to the young Michael Jordan and Marcus Winters of 1993 if you could go back?" Marcus looked out over the water. "I'd tell him, you're not weak, you're human. And that's utter enough." Michael added, "I'd tell him, winning doesn't matter if you lose yourself in the process." Fade to black. Chicago, 6 months later. The morning sun spilled over Lake Michigan, gold-hued and quiet. Chicago hummed in the early light, trucks rumbling over steel bridges, joggers tracing familiar sidewalks. In the penthouse suite atop the Langham, Michael Jordan stood barefoot, watching the city he had once ruled with fire and flight. He poured coffee, not for an interview, not for a media stunt, just because the morning asked for it. There were no PR briefings waiting, no appearances to prepare for, just one speech to finalize and one name he no longer feared to speak. Behind him, Rachel walked in, barefoot too, cradling her own cup. Her hair was pulled back, her suit jacket draped over the back of a chair. "How's it feel?" she asked softly. Michael didn't answer right away. "I used to think peace was what you got after the fight," he said. "Turns out it's something you build, word by word, truth by truth." She smiled. "You built something real this time." Michael turned to her. "We did." They stood in quiet comfort, father and daughter, once separated by secrets now, bound by understanding. The day ahead would be long. Press, speeches, a dedication ceremony, but this moment was theirs. The Jordan Winters Center for Athlete Wellness. The building had once been an empty lot in Bronzeville, 3 blocks from where Michael first touched a basketball. Now it stood tall, glass, steel, and brickwork stitched together by design and purpose. A line of guests stretched down the block. Athletes, reporters, parents, counselors, kids. Inside, Rachel moved through final checks with the event staff while Marcus Winters stood in a conference room with Tanya Washington. The room held no cameras, just old colleagues with shared scars. "I didn't think we'd ever get here," Tanya said. Marcus laughed, not unkindly. "Neither did I. Thought the closest I'd get to this kind of place was as a case study." Tanya rested a hand on his shoulder. "And now you're the architect." They were interrupted by a knock. David Monroe entered. A little older, a little slower, but still sharp. "They're ready," he said. "It's time." Ceremony. Main stage a crowd filled the auditorium. On stage, a long table of speakers, a clear podium, and behind them a banner read, "The Jordan Winters Center, for every player who thought they had to be silent." Rachel introduced the guests, offering remarks about the mission. Not just physical excellence, but mental endurance. Not just performance, but personhood. Then she introduced Marcus Winters. He walked to the podium, pausing to take in the moment. 32 years ago, Marcus began, I sat in a locker room not too far from here, surrounded by greatness. But I felt invisible. I left the game believing I had failed, believing I was too weak, too broken, too sensitive for the world I loved. A hush fell over the room. For years, I blamed one man, and for years, he blamed himself. Neither of us was entirely right or wrong. What we were participants in a system that punished vulnerability. He turned to Michael, who sat in the front row. Today, that system starts to change, and we do it together. Applause thundered through the auditorium. Then Marcus introduced Michael. The GOAT walked to the podium, not with swagger, but with grace, a man at peace with his reflection. I've played in 6 finals. I've won scoring titles, MVPs, gold medals, but none of it compares to standing here today. He let the moment breathe. Not because of what I built, but because of what I finally admitted. For most of my life, I thought greatness was about domination, about silence, about control. But real greatness is something else. It's owning your failures. It's lifting the people you've knocked down. It's speaking the names you tried to erase. He looked directly at Marcus. Marcus Winters. My teammate, my reckoning, my friend. The room stood as one. Behind the stage. Later after the ceremony, as press surrounded them and donors shook hands, Michael and Marcus found themselves alone in a hallway. Michael leaned against the wall, adjusting his cufflinks. "You know, they want us to go on tour," he said. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "A redemption tour." Michael smirked. "A legacy tour." "Not interested in being a prop, Mike." Michael turned serious. "You're not, and I'm not interested in being a god anymore." That landed with weight. Marcus chuckled. "You sure? You spent half your life being one." Michael nodded slowly, and the other half trying to figure out how to stop. 1 month later, the center was open. 3 others were already in development: Los Angeles, Atlanta, Detroit. The movement had become institutional. Former players began coming forward. Some apologized, others told their own stories. Retired legends admitted to years of unresolved pain. A new bill passed in Illinois requiring psychological counselors in all high school sports programs. It was dubbed Winters Law. Rachel took on a more formal role at the foundation. Tanya led the National Training Division for sports counselors. David stayed on as media advisor but took more vacations. Michael stepped back, on purpose. He didn't need to be the face. He'd been the face long enough. The old steakhouse was nearly empty, save for a few patrons and a table in the back, where Michael, Marcus, Rachel, and Tanya sat around wine and memories. They talked about old games, about new goals, about the documentary series, now nominated for 2 Emmys. When dessert came, Michael raised a glass. "To the name I never spoke. For 30 years, he said, and the man I'm proud to call my friend." Marcus raised his glass. "To the man who finally stopped running," Rachel added. to the story that helped more people than 100 highlight reels ever could. Tanya smiled. To what comes next? They clinked glasses, and for the first time in 3 decades, the story of Marcus Winters and Michael Jordan didn't feel like a tragedy. It felt like truth.